Yo, what is going on, everybody? Gabriel Santos here. Today we're going to talk about how emotional dependence to weed makes it difficult to overcome cravings. And this is a follow-up to yesterday's video on how to solve negative emotions without using weed. And so the long story short of it is that for many people, if you're watching this video, you're likely someone who uses weed a lot, daily, multiple times a day, and you want to use less, or you want to quit, and it's for some good reason, probably because you feel like it's either getting in the way to some degree, or it's stunting your growth to some degree, or maybe you're just using a lot more than you really want to, but for whatever reason it's still difficult to use less. And you might be experiencing this feeling or this experience of you want to use less, you recognize you want to use less, but it's hard. And cravings, no matter how much logic or how much good reasoning you have, the cravings still get to you, and it's just hard to get a sense of control, right? And so where emotional dependence comes into play is simply that we've trained ourselves to turn to weed to get certain emotions, and we don't have other ways to reliably get those emotions otherwise. And let me give you a quick story, right? In high school, before I ever used marijuana, there are multiple ways I got my emotional kicks in, right? I was focused in school, right? That's how I got my sense of success, my sense of pride, my sense of self-respect. I played a lot of sports, right? That's how I got endorphins. That's how I got feel-good chemicals. I was very social, right? So that's how I got my sense of connection. That's how I got my sense of laughter. That's how I got my sense of just emotional well-being, mental health. Now, once I started to smoke marijuana, because I didn't use it in a responsible way, and because I wasn't aware of the possibility of becoming dependent on weed emotionally, I would just use it whenever, right? It didn't seem like there was a problem in doing that. And what ultimately ended up happening was I stopped playing sports. I stopped doing well in school. I stopped seeking out even socializing. And instead, I just withdrew, and I would just go to weed to feel happy. I would go to weed for entertainment. I would go to weed to celebrate things. I would turn to weed to stop feeling sad. I would turn to weed when I was stressed out because of school. And long story short, instead of having this full spectrum, this full menu, this full toolkit of ways to deal with my emotions and get feel-good emotions, I would just turn to marijuana. And slowly over time, marijuana became the thing I was dependent on for majority of my feel-good emotions. And on the one hand, that can be a very shameful thing. I felt ashamed of the fact that was the case, but even more so, you pretty much have no choice other than to keep using marijuana because you have no other ways to feel good in a predictable, reliable way. And because using marijuana is so convenient, it's so quick, and it's so predictable and automatic, it's easy to just turn to it. And then the whole vicious cycle begins, and the whole vicious cycle continues. And so that's how, even though maybe you're someone who's in school, or you have your job, but let's go with school, and you recognize, man, smoking this much, it kills my motivation. I really need to cut down and focus up and get my life together. So you say to yourself, all right, you know what? I'm quitting. I'm not gonna smoke today. I'm not gonna smoke this weekend. I'm not gonna smoke this week. And you feel great about that, right? You feel present to the power in that decision. Yet that very same day, that night, the cravings start to pound you, right? It's like, oh my God. And it's because you're used to the routine, around 5 p.m. after work, after your last class of the day. What you're used to is that whole oh my God, I can't wait to go home and smoke. And if we look at it from an emotional standpoint, right, that whole process, right? Oh my God, that's excitement, right? I can't wait to go home and smoke. That's excitement. I can't wait to be done with the stress of my day and have relief, excitement, relief, fun, self-connection, space, right? Space from the day, calmness, stillness away from anxiety, stillness away from stress. And so if around 5 p.m. for years, that way that you've gotten all those emotions in one was to turn to marijuana, guess what's going to happen around 4:30, 5 p.m.? Your brain's like, weed. In reality, what that craving is really about is, I want relief. I want excitement. I want stimulation. I want feel-good stimulation. I want self-connection. I want variety, but I also want predictability, right? And weed is what's representing all those things in one. And so if we don't have an alternate way to get those feel-good chemicals, the brain is going to scream for weed. And so what happens on the flip side is, when you do have other outlets for feel-good emotions, you're not going to crave weed automatically. You're going to crave those other things, because those other things bring you the type of emotions you want. Now, the trouble is that if for years, 5 years, let's say, every day, almost every day, when you want relief, excitement, fun, and predictability all in one, you turn to weed, then the cravings for weed are going to be really loud, even if you do have alternatives. And the truth is, that's just going to be the case, right? But when you do start to find, right, it's very similar to when you're hungry and you start to crave junk food first, right? It's like, oh my God, I want the chips. I want the fried food. I want the burger. I want the fries. I want the pizza. And the craving for those things is really loud. It's like, oh yes, I need the pizza. And the idea of having chicken and rice, salad, even just like a lower portion meal, it's like, that does not sound great, right? That's not going to hit. That's not going to satisfy me. I want the pizza. I want the cheese. I want the chips. But if you've ever just had something anyways, right? Let's say you had those cravings for pizza, but you had like an apple. Already that craving for pizza starts to die down. And so it just goes to show that when we have cravings for weed, it doesn't necessarily mean you want weed, but your body does want something. It wants some form of dopamine. It wants some form of relief. It wants some form of fun. It wants some sort of space away from stress. And so then our job to go from emotional dependence to emotional independence from weed is to begin to create and discover alternative ways to meet our emotional self. And so that's where, for example, one of my favorites is a hot shower or a hot bath. In a lot of ways, it's very similar to the ritual of having a smoke session, right? Let me explain. So similar to a smoke session, right? It's like, okay, the whole process begins with the thought of it. And then with that, you grab the container, you grind it up, right? That's all part of the vibe, right? And then there's the anticipation, you're packing it. Already you're starting to feel it, right? And then you finally take the hit. And then there's just that rush of like that initial like, right? And it's hard to replace that, right? It is hard to replace that to a degree. But what I found is that with a hot bath, right, it's like it all begins with the idea, ooh, I want a hot bath, right? My body has already been trained to like, oh yeah, the relief from a hot bath. I turn on the water, then that's like the equivalent of like grinding and packing the bowl, right? Hear the water pour out the spout. Feel the hot water. Oh yeah, I'm feeling the temperature. And then finally the bath is lifted up. And in a similar way, right, my body's like, oh, it's this full anticipation of relief to come. And then finally I dip my body and it's that similar rush, that similar jolt of like, right? That hit of the bong, that dip into the hot bath, right? Relief, space, decompression. I might put on like a YouTube video, entertainment, stimulation, variety. I can put on this video, that video. I can change it real quick, right? So in a similar way, let's compare the two. Bong session right after work, relief, fun, space, predictability, variety, right? All these 5 emotions in one, right? But now with the hot bath, right? Decompression, relief, predictability, stimulation, right? Watching YouTube at the same time, fun, variety. And so I might take a hot bath or a hot shower 4 times a day, right? I don't know if that's healthy or not, but it's, relatively speaking, healthier than smoking weed 4 times a day. Again, my gripe and our gripe is not with marijuana as a substance, right? I have so much love and gratitude for marijuana. I do not demonize marijuana, right? The issue is that we've become emotionally dependent to something and use it even though we don't want to, or even though we really want to stop or decrease our usage. And that has nothing to do with marijuana being terrible, right? It just has everything to do with what's best for you and our ability to make the decisions that align with that, right? And so hopefully that paints a good picture of, how emotional dependence can keep us stuck. Because, before I discovered hot baths and a number of other, alternatives, you almost have no other choice, especially because marijuana is such a powerful emotional tool because it hits so many different things at once. The issue, though, is that if we don't have any other options, we're more or less stuck, right? And I'm sweating now because it's all hot in here. And so that's why just stopping, right, just quitting or just using less is not the end all be all, right? Because what we want is to not just use less weed so we have more capacity in life. We want to use less weed and also still feel good. And so if we don't build up a toolbox of emotional coping options, then we're just going to have no weed, no emotional needs met, and just be like, well, might as well smoke because my life is shitty without it. All right, so hopefully this, helps connect some dots for you guys. And if you're looking for more one-on-one support, to whether it's accountability, whether it's someone to help you maybe deep dive a little more into what your emotional needs are or things like that, reach out to me. Let's see if we can work together. But in any case, I'm going to get out of this sweaty car, and hopefully you guys have a great day. All right. Talk to you guys in the next one. Peace.